So that was the Amen break, first played in 1969 by Gregory Sylvester GC Coleman. It came as a B-side to a 7-inch single from a band called the Winstons, for which he was the drummer, and the A-side was Colour Him Father. Weird name, but there we are. What's interesting about that period in the late 60s is there were certain funk and soul drummers, particularly Jabbo Starks and Clyde Stubblefield with James Brown's band, that really made an immense impact, much bigger than I think they could have ever imagined, on urban and music subculture over the next 3 or 4 decades. And what this set of videos is going to show you is how this tiny little 4-bar solo, effectively in the middle of a live performance that was this B-side, became the Amen break and became significant to so many different subcultural urban music forms, and then has been taken up by drummers like myself and quite a few others, and we're now taking it back. So we've digested all the subcultures, we've listened to how they worked in clubs, we've listened to how the DJs mixed rhythms and what they did with them, and then we've brought them back and made it something that we do ourselves physically. So in this first lesson, I want to show you exactly what the Amen break is. I've seen it in a lot of places on the internet, and terrifyingly, it's played very wrong. I think the reason for that, I've been teaching it now for about 4 or 5 years at the point of recording this, and it's very difficult actually. It's weirdly difficult. The first 2 bars are what he was playing for the majority of the tune. So I'll just show you that now. He played it, ride cymbal, snare drum, bass drum, and then he does this little clever hi-hat fill in the second 2 bars, which I'll explain to you at the end. So I've just got to remind you again, this was literally 6 seconds of playing time. And as we go through these videos, you'll see the significance of what that did to subculture in dance music. So let me demonstrate for you the first 2 bars, which are the main body of the piece. He played it on the ride cymbal. I'm just going to take it over onto the hi-hat so it's sort of easier to understand, and I'm going to slow it down and just play 4 bars. So I'm going to double up the first half of this piece just so that you can hear it, and then I'm going to explain where he places the notes. So this is the sort of pure funk part of what he's doing, which is this. So what's happening there? That's a very classic type of funk groove for that period. Soul, in its pure form, mutated into funk because of what James Brown was doing and bands like the Winstons. Through 65, 66 became the Blur. And then as you get to the end of that decade of the 60s, that's when funk really started to become the major dance and popular music in America at that time. So what's happening is very, very straightforward. You've got 2 8th note bass drums at the beginning. So you've got a solid 1, an and of 1, which is quite a sort of, that's a usual thing to do in this kind of funk. Straight backbeat on the 2. You've then got 2 16th note offbeats without their bass drums. So for example, Clyde Stubblefield is known for putting those bass drums in to create that central point. Those aren't in there. And then straight snare on the 4 to give us the backbeat on the 2 and the 4. And then a little trick that a lot of funk players use, I've been using it for years, where you put the 16th note snare drum snap at the very, very end of the bar. And what that does is that it propels the dancer and the listener into the next bar. So you're constantly being led forward. The other quite important point to say is that it's swung. So it has a very tiny swing to it, which is basically where you're pushing all the 16th notes very slightly later to give it a nice bouncy, danceable feel. So I'm just going to cut it up into its pieces, and then that doesn't need explaining anymore, because if you want to check it out, you can just rewind this and see what's happening. So I'm going to cut it into its little bits, which is this. The really important point is the 16th note bass drum double that comes after the 2 central snare drums. That's of absolute importance, and it becomes very significant in the next lessons, particularly the hip hop lesson to come. That's really important. And then the drum and bass, it becomes even more important. Let's get on to the really important bit, which is the second 2 bars, because they're the tricky thing. That's the bit where he soloed. Now, it's not known whether he improvised it because he was in front of an audience, or whether he did that every night when they played that song. Nobody knows. It just is what it is. It's very interesting. It's very funk. The placement is in very unusual places. I mean, I always say to my students, if you apply the word funk to rhythm, you're really talking about intelligent placement of notes. It's not necessarily about the music style. It's more about where you put the notes to make the greatest effect and the most intelligent way of doing something. So I'm going to play you the second 2 bars, which are the trick. I'll cut it up and then show you how that works. But again, it's going to be a case of, I'll play it slower for you, and then it'll be a case of rewinding it a few times and learning it, because this is where the difficulty lies. It's surprisingly difficult for how simple it seems. So again, I'll take it off the, oh no, I won't. Actually, I'm going to play it on the ride cymbal to give you the full effect with the hi-hat at the end. So that's this. This is slowed down. He played it at 120 BPM. And this is going to be slower. Now, what's interesting in that is, well, there's lots that's interesting in that, but what he does with the hi-hat at the end is really mad, because he hangs the open hi-hat over 2 beats, which is a really weird thing to do, but it's very funk and it's very clever because it propels it. A, it's a cue for the band. B, it then propels the end of the solo, slamming back into full funk, horns, everything going, guitars, the whole thing, and everyone's up dancing again. It's an interesting tool that he's used there. The difficult placement is in the middle. I think what I'm just going to do is show it to you a couple of times through, really slowly, and then it'll be the case of just going back and checking what I'm doing and checking the different angles. Look out for the placement in the bass drum and where he shifted the snare drums to. Because if I start talking about 8th notes and 16th notes, it's going to get really boring. So be careful to watch out on the timing. So I'll do it a few times now, you know, maybe 4 bars, I'll probably do 6 bars. So I'll do it 3 times through and just see where the placement is on everything. Because this is really going to heavily relate to drum and bass, jungle and dubstep, okay? So that was the Amen break. Essential to the history and progression of urban rhythms, which is what this set of videos is about. This is so important. Spend time and really learn it, because you're going to need it in minute detail. You're going to need it. I'll see you on the next one.